Welcome to SSI Meetup. Today we have Christopher Allen with us, who has been so kind to propose this webinar for today, which is a very special occasion for the remembrance of the people that sacrificed their lives to bomb the Nazi identity registries in the Netherlands. He told us a little bit about the whole background of what happened at the time. This webinar is part of a series of the recent rebooting Web of Trust that was supposed to take place in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, but which couldn't take place because of the COVID-19 crisis that we're going through right now. And the Bitcoin NGO Argentina was part of the organization team of rebooting Web of Trust in Argentina. Alianza Blockchain in Iberoamerica was part of it. And today with SSI Meetup, we're very happy to have the opportunity to share with all of you this event, because I think what Christopher's sharing with us is a very deep lesson of the very big responsibility we carry in the identity, self-sovereign identity community, and the technologies and the architectures that we're trying to develop, which can empower the world and make the world a much better place that is more that is fairer and more trustworthy for everyone. But at the same time, it's also can become a tool of a dystopian world that we wouldn't really like to relive. And we unfortunately we have plenty of examples in the past of the history where this happened already. And I think some of the things that Christopher will be sharing with us today are very important for that. There will be a minute of silence that we will all try to hold, and we hope you can all join us in this. In 1906 Amsterdam time, and this was supposed to happen physically in Amsterdam, but because of the virus situation, it cannot take place. So we're doing this electronically. And yeah, and thank you everyone who took the time today to join this occasion. As I mentioned it last week, it's something very important to me. As an organizer of SSI Meetup, I have a German-Spanish background, and I went through the German education system. And I discussed this before with Christopher too, about how important it is to remember the crimes of the past, and not only to remember them, but also to understand them and try to avoid them for the future. And I think that's what Christopher is encouraging us here to do, all of us together. And I'm really grateful to him for giving us this opportunity. Just very quickly in the next slide, for those that don't know what we do at SSI Meetup yet, basically, we've been going on for 2 years now, trying to empower global SSI communities. This is open to everyone. If you're an individual, company, association, whatever you are, you can reuse all the material that is being shared here with you today, including this presentation today by Christopher, which I hope you will use extensively, because I think it's one of the most important subjects that gives purpose and intention to everything we're trying to do here, which is about trying to really create a more equitable and fair system for everyone. And identity is one of the cornerstones. And the more I personally learn about this, the more I understand how important it is, but also about how dangerous it can be in the wrong hands. So this is all with the Creative Commons by Share Alike license, which basically means you can reuse this material. Hopefully you will do so. And please give credit back today to Christopher, Rebooting Web of Trust, and to SSI Meetup if you use it. As always, this is session number 53. We will have session number 52 next week, but at this time we've changed the chronologically of things a little bit. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please just jump in and use the question tool. And I will bring up those questions to Christopher also. And today we will experiment a little bit. Christopher will open the floor a little also. So if you have any questions or anything you want to share, then you will have the opportunity to do so verbally or via chat. And Christopher, thank you so much for proposing this. And I think you can take it over from here.
Yeah. So I wanted to begin this with a minute of silence. It's 7:05 today. In Amsterdam, the sun is setting. It's becoming dark. And this is in remembrance of something that happened 77 years ago tonight in Amsterdam. What you see in front of you in the center is the actual civil archives. It's now the Zoo Cafe, the Amsterdam Zoo. If next time you're at the zoo, take a look. A moment of silence. Thank you very much. My name's Christopher Allen, and among other things, I've been working on identity privacy and security for over 30 years. I'm the co-author of SSL TLS. I'm currently co-chair of the Credentials Working Group, etc. I heard this story, I'm going to skip through this, gosh, maybe 20 years ago. I wrote about it first in 2004. And just, somebody who said, oh, this is why when people speak about privacy in Europe, they mean it in a different way than we do in the United States. And I found that a very kind of moving statement that, when we're, as someone who was born and raised in the United States, when I was thinking about privacy, it was very much around the, don't tread on me, all of the different, aspects of defensive privacy, keeping, governments out of my hands and whatever, but not why. Like, what's the root of this why? And I found that when I was speaking to Europeans, in particular the Dutch, they were kind of coming from a different perspective. So I started writing about this, and I've kind of been telling the story off and on for a while. But it really came to a head in January, and at the end of January, I was in the Netherlands in order to speak with a number of organizations, both technical, the W3C, and as well as government representatives and things of that nature. And I wanted to attend this 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. So I went to the memorial, and it was very, very crowded. And to my surprise, this gentleman stood up, and everybody got quiet. It was clear it was a big deal. And it was Mark Rutte, the Netherlands Prime Minister. And he basically, for the first time ever, the Netherlands government apologized for what happened. Specifically, he said, when authority became a threat, our government agencies failed as guardians of law and security. Now that the last survivors are still among us, I apologize today on the behalf of the government for government actions then. This was quite a moving statement for people. I don't speak Dutch, but I could see that there were people that were very moved by this statement. It was a bigger deal than I thought. This was interesting. So why did he say this statement? He didn't really describe the details, but something really went wrong in World War II in Netherlands, more so than in other countries. And the real evidence of this is that more Jews died as a percentage of population. 3/4 of the Jews died, where it was like 23% in France. Why did this happen? Well, part of this is that the Nazis took over civil administration, and once they had it, they had the data. So what went wrong there? So what happened is, in the early days of the Depression, J.L. Lentz became head of the National Inspectorate of Population Registers in the Dutch civil service. And this was, beginning to be at the height of the Depression. And, over the course of his service in the 30s, the efficacy of the service allowed Dutch citizens to have access to a lot of basic services that were unavailable to countries that were much less organized or could deal with the problems of the Depression. He was very exemplary in the Dutch civil service in this regards. It really worked. Among other things, he promoted more unity in the population registers. And by 1936, he established a decree that every resident in the Netherlands must have a personal identity card that is in the civil archives, and that these cards must all be controlled from a single office in each region. And he was basically given a reward by the Queen of the Netherlands for these efforts and the success of these efforts. Unfortunately, in 1940, after the capitulation, the centralized civil archives were one of the first places the Nazis went to. In fact, they had already been in correspondence before the capitulation with J.L. Lentz. They knew exactly where the archives were, you know, who was involved with them, etc. And they knew that they had a sympathetic person in J.L. Lentz, who was then asked to create a very difficult to forge national identity card. So he had been thinking about this for, at least half a decade before the capitulation, but had been rebuffed by the Netherlands government because of what happened with registration cards during the Spanish Civil War. The Nazis said, no, go ahead and do it and make it very difficult to forge. He literally wrote this book on personal identity, that's what that is in Dutch, and in it is a very interesting proof of inclusion in the population register, which was how he was able to leverage these tools very effectively. So very quickly, the Dutch resistance, which was one of the most active in Europe. Remember, there are more people recognized from the Netherlands by Israel as being, I forgot what the award is, but it's, for being protectors of the Jews. There are more of them in the Netherlands than any other country. Part of this is because resistant members, worked hard to forge identification cards. They, as J.L. Lentz improved them, they would then fix it. They created, hidden printing presses, special tools to be able to do all the stamps and embossing and things of that nature. But unfortunately, there was a serious problem. At any point, a police officer, a military checkpoint or whatever, could basically stop someone, take their credential, their personal identity card to this civil archive, and they could very swiftly use this proof of inclusion in a civil register to discover that the person didn't have the J on their card that was on the one that was in the civil registry. So the resistance then proceeded to arrange to have relationships with different civil servants in that civil registry, and they would go in and fill up a briefcase and go home with a box of a folder of records, and then back in those same printing factories hidden in the basements, they would falsify the identity cards that were in the civil registries. But they couldn't do it fast enough. This was just not happening fast enough. So by 1943, these forgeries were increasingly failing, and so at sunset on this day 77 years ago, 13 men basically overwhelmed the guards. They drugged them because they didn't want to hurt them, pulled them aside and tried to bomb the registry. The registry caught on fire. They'd even arranged for like fire trucks to be delayed and other stuff with the goal that the whole thing would burn down. But it didn't work. Only 15% of the records were stored. Meanwhile, in France, the Vichy government was also assisting in Nazi deportation of Jews, but they became very unwilling to do this over time. And also in general, their records weren't as centralized. So it was very hard that once the Vichy government stopped cooperating to arrest Jews, for the Nazis to take the civil archives of France and do what they did in the Netherlands. So what ultimately resulted from this? Now there was this bombing that was in 1943 and 1944. They specifically helped the Allies bomb this registry. but only another 10% of the registry was destroyed by that point. So what happened? 75% of the Jews that were residents and citizens of the Netherlands died. They were deported and killed in death camps, as compared to 23% of Jews. So this is not only a higher percentage, it's also higher in absolute number, even though there were far fewer Jews in the Netherlands. So this is a living history. This failure and some of the consequences after the war, when they became aware of it, I think troubled a lot of people. People that had been in the resistance, people that returned after surviving. I actually had the fortunate opportunity to meet with the child of 2 survivors. And he was the one who actually explained to me immediately after this apology that what was going on. He explained that his mother had been rounded up in a razzia. So what's a razzia? So the resistance and citizens would go on protests and strikes, and the German responses go round up 1,000 Jews and deport them. And so they could just pull out the records with the J on them and say, go get those people, we're rounding them up. His mother was one of those. His father actually fled and was hidden by the resistance in a nearby city, Utrecht, but ultimately was betrayed. And although he doesn't really know for sure, he believes it was through friends of friends who basically were able to track him down. Basically a form of early social network analysis. So when I first started speaking about this off and on since the late 90s, older members of the Dutch community and European thanked me for sharing this. But in particular, members of the government felt a bit embarrassed by it because it was still an active topic. These records were, for another 30 plus years, 40 years, were kind of toxic waste that were, hidden away in different parts in different Dutch archives because they just didn't want to acknowledge it. So finally, now that there's been an apology, they're saying, hey, now maybe I can speak a little bit more. But I've also heard from a lot of younger members of the community that have been active in data privacy and other things that told me, yeah, they were taught about the Holocaust in school, but they never heard this particular story and the responsibility of these civil archives that made it such a large percentage of people who died. So the lessons for today are that despite the trust in government we have and we want to have, we never know what might happen tomorrow. Centralized architectures and immutable proofs can be used for both good and evil. It can protect people during the Depression. It can be used to round up people during World War II. Now, this is my opinion. I believe that this living history from the survivors of World War II is the reason why the Dutch government and civil service representatives have really been so supportive of the human rights privacy aspects of GDPR. And in fact, they have a slightly stronger version of GDPR in the Netherlands. And I also believe that this is part of the reason why self-sovereign identity is on the agenda there much before it is in many other countries. But we need a remembrance because it's been 75 years. The old gentleman that spoke to me, his parents are dead. He's in his 70s. The passing of old generations mean that these stories are not being shared anymore. So we need ways to communicate it. Also, there's a lot of fake news and other things that are attempting to fade these memories for various purposes. Another question that's been raised here is, in a world of immutable records, where are the false identification cards and fake baptismal certificates? How can an honest to goodness hero fake an ID in a world where IDs can't be faked? This is, an important issue. Carl Lutz, who was also involved in this bombing but was not executed, he forged over 62,000 documents. a sculptor, and you know, he would basically sculpt by hand all the different printing things that embossing, etc., that was needed to forge these identity documents. You know, how do we have people be able to protect people when things go wrong? Now, there is today, I think, still a need for trustless solutions. I really do feel that there are, you know, is a rise of this type of stuff even before COVID-19, but I think COVID-19 can play into the hands. We're seeing facial recognition being used all over the world, and then nation states are now collecting more location data, trying to override previous rules that prevented them from using location data. So we need new ways to protect human rights. But we do need both. So the Netherlands today and in most of the world, we're in high trust societies. The citizens trust the government and the government trusts the systems. This is great. This is good. We want this. But it isn't true everywhere, and it isn't true every when. There's this concept called less identity, which is legally enabled self-sovereign identity. Well, that's where a lot of the activities in self-sovereign identity are, you know, rapidly moving. Is projects in cooperation with governments, in cooperation with big commerce. We're seeing this in the U.S., Canada, New Zealand, obviously the EU, and other places. But we do need solutions that are trustless. Thus, this identity community forum remembrance. I'd like to see every year on the 27th of March that we have a moment of silence and share this story. And I want it to be a forward remembrance, or it's not an English word, but you know, let's use it as a hashtag for remembrance. To remember people like sculptor Gerrit van de Veen, who forged 80,000 civil records, painter William Arondius, and 11 others who were found guilty of attempting to destroy these civil archives and were executed by the Nazis. And to salute all those who died to protect the defenseless in World War II, who eased suffering in genocides past, or fought discrimination and totalitarianism. But we also want to remember forward, to those today in the front, the protesters in Hong Kong, those that are trying to find out what's going on in Xi'an with the Chinese re-education concentration camps in Western China. I want to praise the Gambian government for taking the Burmese government to court in The Hague to demand protection for the Rohingya. They're in an entirely different continent. They don't have deep ties with Burma, but they witnessed what happened in genocides in Rwanda in their recent past, and they don't want to see it happen again. I want to, remember those people who are protecting immigrant children on the US-Mexican border, or are protecting us against Cambridge Analytica-like attacks that can happen in this year's elections. Remember, there's a lot of elections coming up this year, and all are vulnerable, and they're going to be more vulnerable given a lot of the restrictions due to COVID-19. We want to remember all of those who are protecting minority communities, whether or not they're gays, transsexuals, various ethnic minorities, etc. We want to salute all those who are defending the vulnerable. So my name's Christopher Allen. This is my contact information. I appreciate you coming to the Forum Remembrance today. I hope that you will tell these stories in the future. I would like to see if there are people in the room who have a story in this area that they'd like to share, maybe a grandfather or an important story in all of this. And then after we go through that, I'd like to talk a little about some of the opportunities right now and some of the challenges right now because of location privacy, and answer people's questions. So I'll turn it back to you, Alex, if you want to see if people have stories to tell or have questions.
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone wants to share a story, we're like 21 people in the room right now, please feel free to do so. I'm just gonna share my own to give time to everyone else to think if they have something to share. If not, maybe we can directly go ahead with what you proposed, Christopher. I remember going like 4 years ago to Poland, and we visited the whole of Poland. And as I mentioned in the beginning, like I went through the German education system where when you're a kid, you get kind of tired of having to study the Holocaust in so much detail all the years, all the time. And I didn't realize about how little I knew until I went to Poland and I visited Krakow and Auschwitz, and I really realized the whole barbaric dimension this whole system had. And so I don't recommend any kids to go because I think that's too tough to do that on any kid to see it. But I really recommend it to any adult to take up that opportunity and see the dimension of the crimes committed over there. And Poland unfortunately had got some of the worst of many of the things that happened in the Second World War in terms of the Holocaust and everything, because most of the concentration camps were based in Poland. So yeah, just wanted to share that because if anyone has the opportunity, I think that's a really good lesson, and that's why I think also this proposal from Christopher for this remembrance is really important, especially in the identity and self-sovereign identity space, because the responsibility goes far beyond like just creating a new cool technology, because it can have very deep impact as other cool technologies had in the past. Yeah, so I haven't seen any proposals to comment, Christopher. So if you want to go ahead, okay. I think then that's good.
Any questions?
Oh, here's one person that I know really well who raised his hand, so I can. Rolfo, you want to say something? Yeah, I'm just gonna give you voice access so you can share. But take into account he's Argentinian, so he might talk for a long time. But just give me a moment.
Hello.
Hey,
hello.
Rodolfo.
How are you? How are you guys? Pleased
Great.
to meet you again, Christopher. I'm glad we're doing this talk. It's very, very, very interesting what you're saying. My only concern was that in these kind of situations, the ones we are living right now, it's easy to find reasons to open data, but then when the situation is gone, it's hard to close those doors again, no? Or to know if they're actively being closed or not. So I think it's a big concern, even though perhaps now we're not thinking about the impact of the things that are being done because of the better, for the better good, for the biggest good, yes, but it's relevant to consider the implications of this for after the pandemic is gone. So thanks for the time.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think there are interesting issues. I mean, I know that in particular in the EU, they have very strong protections against telecoms and big penalties. And I've shared on Twitter a number of links, including, you know, the chair of the European Data Protection Board basically saying, hey, you know, if we allow the companies to give us this information or force these companies to give us this information, we're going to accept the liability for that. So we must have emergency legislation in order so that we won't accept the liability. And that's, you know, again, kind of a red flag of, oh, we're going to do these emergency emergency rules. And unfortunately, we've learned in a lot of countries that these emergency rules often never really expire. This happened in 9/11. This happened, you know, in the Israeli-Palestinian war. You know, a lot of these emergencies never end. You know, there's always another COVID-19 around the corner. It will be the next one. So we really want to try to do the right thing. There are some, you know, interesting efforts out there. I encourage you, I don't have the links on the slide, but I encourage you to take a look at a variety of interesting things. None are perfect. There is Blue Trace, which is a protocol being used in Trace Together by the Singapore government. You know, it tries to do some good things in allowing people to, you know, see who, basically when they walk by other cell phones, the different cell phones will communicate with each other, and allow for when someone discovers they have COVID-19 to basically be able to report all the various parties that they've had in contact with. And they've done some work to try to make it a bit more private, but ultimately it requires a strong trusted third party, which is the Singapore government. And you know, we can make good presumptions for their, you know, of their good intentions, but we can design things that isn't required. Another project is called SafePath, which is headed in at MIT, but it's a multinational group of people that's taking a look at another approach to that problem. But even, you know, if we can solve, you know, some of these sort of cell phone tracking type things, there's also data from cell phone towers. There's all the other type of anonymization and de-anonymization techniques that the identity community has been talking about for a long time, but maybe haven't been focused on the location privacy things. So I'm urging the technology community to come to a meeting next Tuesday at 12 noon Eastern time, 9 a.m. Pacific time, and I think that's 6 p.m. Central European summertime, at the W3C Credentials Community Group, where I will be, you know, facilitating a discussion about some of the you know, current projects, but also like, what are the requirements? How can we do it better? You know, are we forgetting things that are maybe more important first? So if you're in the technology community, I encourage you to come to the Credentials Community Group next Tuesday. So I see Dave has a question.
You want to read it out?
Yeah, so Dave Birch asks, the mention of COVID-19 makes me think that many of us will have to start thinking about privacy again, but from another perspective. Many people will look at the Asian responses to the virus and compare them to the European American responses, which resulted in a much higher death rate. Can the group put forward practical and privacy enhancing responses to the pandemic? I believe we can. I mean, this is part of the reason why we wanted to have a rebooting Web of Trust in Singapore in the fall, because I think there are opportunities to create tools that allow for not only the epidemiological health information to be anonymized and shared, but can allow for some more consensual type of systems. So I think it could be, I think it's very reasonable to be able to create a zero knowledge system that is roughly equivalent of what Blue Trace does, but does it in such a fashion that you know, when you do the report, it uses a decentralized fashion to not only notify the other parties on their phones, they can do so in a way such that they don't know who it was who said, oh, I've got COVID-19 and you might have been exposed, but also allow those people to do, you know, to accept that or not accept it, that information on their, you know, rather than having it be forced on them by the government. I think, you know, when you see a doctor, you know, when you see a psychiatrist, you see anybody else, you know, there's certain consents that are required for you to be able to participate in a health system, but it is a stage, it's a step. You know, we ought to allow, you know, allow those to be easier. And we also want to be able to address things where, you know, once there is a test for resistance to a particular virus, that you can basically certify that you have done so, but do so in a voluntary way so that it's not forced from you. I think there are ways to do all of this stuff. How many we can do now? How many I have had people say, oh, wow, you know, you shouldn't even touch this stuff because no matter what, it's going to be bad. Only do trustless solutions, only, you know, do sort of the Bitcoin style where there can be no trust in governments. And I think they have a valid point. This stuff is going to be abused. We just need to try to, for those governments and corporations and whatever that want to try to do the right thing, we can help them. I don't think this is going to help China. I don't think this is going to help a number of other countries, but we can make progress. Claire says, thank you. This is a powerful message for the identity professionals. This could be equally powerful for the education of people faced with consent options, because it would give them a reason to pause or not give consent. Please comment on consent. Yeah, I mean, consent's a hard problem here, and I think, I'll start off with, I think, we still have a hard time even really defining well in the technology community what consent means. Pushing a button saying I consent is not consent. Having somebody, when you go through immigration, basically say, oh, you've got to give us your passwords to all of your social media accounts, or you can't, or you're gonna have to fly back home. That doesn't feel like consent to me. But there are things where we actually can get worse results epidemiologically and for the common good when people are scared to offer consent, to offer information to be anonymized or mistrust the systems, because then they'll basically try to avoid those systems, trick them, etc., and could end up with things that are worse outcomes, even given such a system. So it is a tough problem. I don't know that, I mean, some of these things we've been fighting for a long time. Some of these, issues and challenges, aren't old. Are old, excuse me. But there just hasn't been the energy to fix them. But maybe now there is. In this crisis, there is the opportunity to redirect forces, redirect energies, maybe identify some low-hanging fruit, some best practices that are doable now, and put some appropriate energy into better solutions that we can implement, maybe not for this crisis, but for the next one. So thank you, Claire. So Dave says in another comment, Bill Gates said last week that people have been tested and have antibodies to get a digital certificate. Could this be a trigger for real change in the US? This is the kind of thing that we've been trying to address in the credentials community around things like verifiable claims. So if I could basically get a verifiable claim from a trusted body that basically says, oh, I had COVID-19, I have recovered for it, and I am no longer contagious, that could be a valuable thing. So, but even though at its simplest level, that certificate could be very valuable, and we could probably get there pretty fairly rapidly. But there are issues that we don't want people to be mandated to have it either. We want to be able to use this for consensual gatherings and such, but you shouldn't. It shouldn't be necessarily forced from you. So where is the appropriate lines for this is even a simple thing as a certificate of COVID-19 immunity. I know there are a lot of neighborhoods with a lot of our elder generations that could really use a core of people that were recovered from COVID-19 that could run errands or help various people. I have family and friends and colleagues who have elders at home all by themselves and are getting insufficient help. So this certificate could be very useful. So Phil defines anonymity as one of the key characteristics of trustless identity. Well, there actually are many forms of identity. we have to, sort of draw to say that it's a gray area. On one hand, we have absolute anonymity, which is that even if you claimed you were that person or that identifier, controlled of that identifier, you couldn't prove it. Like, it's absolutely repudiable. That's one level of anonymity, and in some cases, that's really good. And in effect, that's what a lot of the better privacy protocols support at one level. But that's not going to be good enough for a lot of purposes. Up from there is the ability to prove control of the identifier or of the data that is associated with that identifier. And that's what DIDs and the verifiable credentials architecture is trying to build. There's still issues of correlation and other stuff in that area in a variety of different ways, both through mechanisms of data minimization, but also other forms of cryptographic anti-correlation techniques to allow people to be anonymous and not be able to be easily de-anonymized. It's a difficult topic. We can at least make it difficult. We can make it more difficult for attackers. Will we be able to make it impossible for attackers in the short term? No, we've got some work to do. Beyond that, there is various forms of pseudo-anonymity where it's revocable, where you can basically say, collect information anonymously, collect certificates, et cetera, anonymously, but then later be able to prove you are the physical person that holds that digital identity. So that's another level. And then there's a level which is, really not much to do specifically at the individual level, but at the collective level. What are the mandates we put on corporations and governments to anonymize information that they do collect, hopefully briefly, and allow for the healthcare stuff to be done properly. So it's a big topic.
Any
so
other
more questions or thoughts?
Yeah, let's see.
Well, again, I thank you very much for joining in the remembrance today. There will be more discussions about this challenge that we have between, how do we do legally enabled self-sovereign identity? How do we do trustless self-sovereign identity? How do we, protect our communities against disasters and major challenges like the pandemic, but also protect individuals and against future abuses. I mean, some of these cell phone tools in the hands of a future McCarthy or some other worse individual, and we have a number of examples in the last 100 years, is pretty frightening. So we have to balance these things, and we want, and I think we can. So Dave, yeah, so Dave said he would be happy to speak at to talk at a meetup sometime. Send a list of upcoming events. I will. I basically, what I know of that is coming up shortly, obviously there's the open credentials community call next Tuesday, and it'll probably be an ongoing topic periodically. There is the Internet Identity Workshop, which was canceled like rebooting was last week, but they have decided that they're going to try to do a virtual version on the same dates, and see if we can't use some of these virtual tools to accomplish the same results. So that is coming up in the beginning of May, I think. The dates are on the CCG announcements. I know that we are currently planning on having a Rebooting Web of Trust face-to-face in September in The Hague. Obviously there's some, coordination challenges right now. We can't officially announce that until we have more sponsors. But if you're interested in sponsoring that face-to-face in The Hague, we have support from the Hague government, the city government, and some other organizations, the Dutch Blockchain Coalition, et cetera, to host an event there. Obviously, no one knows if we're still going to be under different kinds of lockdowns in September. But we're also working on some better virtual tools so we can hold virtual events on these topics. Right now, I'm posting most of this type of information on Twitter. I've been finding that some of the other networks, in particular Facebook, have not been sharing my posts. So I've kind of stopped sharing on some of the other social networks. And but Twitter seems to be working reasonably effective. And of course, my contact information is here. My Twitter is @Christopher A. My email is christopher.a@lifewithalacrity, and I would be glad to talk with you.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I did not mean. I hope I clarified, Phil. The face-to-face is canceled, but they're moving virtual, and I'm looking forward to their experiments because we might have to do the same in September for rebooting if we are unable to meet in September still.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Christopher, and thank you everyone who joined us today. Thank you, Dave. I really recommend his book, Identity is Money, is the New Money, which is an excellent book. It's one of the first identity books I did read. And there are plenty of people that are with very familiar names today, many of them leading some of the global leading SSI initiatives. So I'm really happy to see that because I think you guys and ladies, you're great amplifiers for sharing this message from Christopher and with the Dutch experience as an example about how we can all work on this in the most productive way and constructive way and to make this technology and more of what it means available and positive for everyone. Christopher, any final thoughts you would like to share?
Well, I hope that this can kind of be an annual thing. I mean, just like rebooting Web of Trust, there's someday I'd like to say we're done, but it's going to be a little while, and I think we're going to have to remember this dilemma of good data being used for good, but then later being used for bad for a long time. So maybe we can all meet at the Amsterdam Zoo a year from now and have a remembrance, and but also have our kids around us and enjoy the zoo. So thank you everybody for joining today, and hope to speak with many of you in person or online in the near future. Thank you much.
Excellent. Thank you everyone who joined us today. And next week, the 31st of March, we have our next SSI meetup, which will be about the European SSI Framework Labs, which is an initiative from the European Union to fund different SSI initiatives for small and medium-sized companies in the European Union. And very popular SSI meetup, which I think has reached the highest number in terms of signups so far. So I encourage you to join that too. And of course, we will be doing many more of these from all the different subjects that are relevant to SSI. You can join our Telegram channel, Twitter, Facebook, and all those different things in social media, where we also distribute information about each new upcoming event. Or the best is the newsletter on the website where you can sign up to in a very simple way. Christopher, thank you so much again for sharing this very insightful and important idea about what happened in the Second World War with the Nazis in the Netherlands, and I think that gives a lot of purpose to everyone. So I thank you in the name of everyone who joined us today and who will be listening and watching this video. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.